Likewise, I don't know if you guys caught the Black Hat talk that the Microsoft guys gave out. But one of the things they're doing is the Microsoft Exploitability Index. And you start seeing people start to say, well, how exploitable is this really? And the answer is going to be on most modern platforms, not so much. Right? Like, when's the last time anyone broke into your Linux machine with a buffer overflow? Can anyone remember that happening? Sadmin was Solaris. That was not Linux. And it's not a buffer overflow. We will have a remedial class after this. OK. So you can feel free to, you get a free heckle point when you come back. But the thing you're going to stop doing is you're going to stop patching and stop paying attention to overflows at all. Right? You don't need a HIDS to do API redirection, which slows your machine down by 20% and reduces every investment you've ever made in it, if there's no overflows in the first place. If no one's using them, right? If the worst problem you have is a DOS and the HIDS doesn't do anything about that, right? So is the HIDS market booming right now? Not really, right? It's there, but it's there because of really strong partner relationships. So you're going to stop investing in that stuff. And I think if you look at some of the way people deal with these things, in security especially, you can take a little case study that I like to call the heap overflow. This is the See No Evil Monkey. I like him. But essentially, there really aren't heap overflow worms. So that's an interesting aspect of life, right? Like, it's certainly possible, but they're just not there. There's not a whole lot of exploits on Millworm for heap overflows. And if you look at them, you can see why, right? We teach a heap overflow class. And it's a pretty, I don't think there is another heap overflow class. And we use Windows 2000 as our target platform simply because it is doable on Windows 2000 in class. We can teach you how to do it. It takes about 4 days. But if we were to then ramp up to Windows 2003 and Vista, unless you are really good, it's very hard to teach you more than just theory. You don't ever get to do it, and if you don't ever get to do it in class, you never really learn it, because everything should be hands-on. Otherwise, it just drips out of your brain like muck. So there aren't any exploits on Millworm for this stuff, because very, very, very few people have ever written a Windows heap overflow. It's like 1 in a million, even out of hackers. And it's just really hard. And the same thing is true for Linux. If you look at Linux, Linux is usually a bit ahead of Windows in this sort of regard, and they have a pretty, maybe because it's a more simplified architecture without video drivers, but you know, they're concentrating really hard on that heap security, and they're good at it. And if you don't see it on Millworm, it does not exist, or whatever your website of the day is. Maybe it's Security Focus or whatever you go to for your bugs. But if it's not there, it does not exist. Now, there is one exception to this, which is client-side bugs, like in a browser. Those do exist. You'll see some heap overflow stuff in there, and it typically will be fairly unreliable because people still don't know how to write heap overflow shellcode, because that's another building block they didn't invest $200,000 in. And sometimes I throw out pretty big numbers, and the reason for that is because our company has invested tons of money in this stuff, and we know how much it costs. So here's the reaction that you get. This was 2005, but it kind of demonstrates the issue, right? Print spooler vulnerability was found by Kostya Korchinski. It's a good vulnerability. It's a heap overflow. We actually use it in class as our demo vulnerability. It was then written up by Nicholas Weissman, who's I found him in Mexico. He's an Argentinian guy. And I found him because he was writing heap overflows for fun against GDB, which doesn't seem like something I would want to do in my spare time. But we said, you know what? If that's what you're doing in your spare time, we have a problem for you. And he's quite good. You'll see a picture of him later. But here's what they say. They say, on Windows XP Service Pack 2 and Windows Server 2003, this issue would result in a denial of service condition. And it says, this cannot be exploited for remote code execution or for elevation of privilege, et cetera, et cetera. Is that really true? I don't know. Here's how it works on Windows 2000, right? So this is just a quick little example. There's a little memory leak. Here's 2 little memory leaks. Those are little functions we wrote. And we make an RPC connection. And then the set progress stuff I should have deleted, but it moves a little bar in the little GUI. It's nice. And so you get your what and your where, and you sort of have this write for abstraction where you're writing 4 bytes from somewhere to somewhere else, which is actually calling the vulnerability. So these two things are actually doing the vulnerability. These two things are exploiting something completely random else that causes a memory leak, which is how you do these sorts of things. And then eventually you overwrite the PEB lock function, which is a little function pointer that's always in the same place. And then at the very end you call RPC enum ports, which is just going to really, it's not going to do the enumeration of ports, it's just going to trigger the PEB lock function. So, it's readable here. And one great thing about using Python is that it is readable, even if you don't know Python, which you should. Oh, you saw the giraffe too early. Damn. All right, so answer is, was that too hard? Yeah. So it's a default remote system on Windows 2000 SP4, right? The vendors have been very careful to tell you, in many situations it's not vulnerable, so don't worry about it too much. No one worried about it. There were never any public exploits for this. To my knowledge, there still aren't any free exploits. And we would walk into a penetration test 6-7 months after some company had received the advisory from Microsoft, and we'd still own them with this bug, even though they were patched for other things. But they never saw an exploit for this, so they never really wanted to patch it because that cost them money, right? And so the lesson I took from this is that if there's nothing free out there for them to run, they're pretty much going to ignore it, right? It's like, it's a heap overflow, but no need, no big deal. And just to give you this is how it works, was the 2 mem leaks actually filled in these 2 things, and then you actually allocated some stuff here, and then you allocate stuff behind it, and you freed the first one, then you filled the second one up, and then you overflow, and then once you did that, you had control of this thing, and you did that about 4 times, and then it got you the shell, and it's a little shell that pops up, which is nice. But all of this process, Nico's one of the best in the world, and it's still going to take us a man-month, and that's Windows 2000. So there are very few organizations out there who are willing to put a man-month into a Windows 2000 exploit that's a heap overflow that works on SP4. We just happen to be one of them. And this is, when we look at heap overflows in general, we know for a fact we can make them more reliable than other vulnerabilities out there. We can make them more reliable than Stack Overflows. We can make them more reliable than pretty much everything. But we also know that it's going to take us 1 to 6 man-months. And that's conservative, and that's for something that we know we can do. We think it's pretty easy to do, right? In the outlier cases, you're looking at 12, 15 man-months to do one exploit.
How would format string attacks fit in that spectrum of exploitability?
Format string attacks are almost exact, but yeah, they're pretty easy to find, and even in a binary, they're fairly obvious. In the rare case that you find one, it's pretty much just like this in terms of power of the technique. The only difference that I like about heap overflows is that if you do them right, you're not doing write fors anymore. You're actually corrupting the data instead of relying on. That's the advantage of a heap overflow, which you can still kind of do with format strings, but it's not as easy. But of course now there's all these. It goes back and forth. It depends who you ask. But they're both really hard now, right? They're both going to be 1 to 6 man-months. So, and those used to be trivial, right? We'd whip them up at night after drinking a bunch of Red Bull, and then we'd go out and have fun with them, right? So here's the thing. If it's going to take 1 to 6 man-months of a skilled, we're talking a skilled man-month, we're not talking